Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. So World Cup preparations are starting to shift into gear. We've still got a few months to go until the World Cup, but training squads started to be announced and Ireland have named their 42-player squad for their summer camps over the next few months. So that's what I'm talking about in this video, talking about some of the selections that Andy Farrell has gone for and some of the big decisions that are faced by this Ireland side, the #1 ranked team in the world, some of the big decisions heading into the World Cup in France, which kicks off in September. So make sure you drop a comment down below about anything to do with this Irish squad, this Irish training squad that comes to mind for you, anything I touch on in the video, and also looking ahead to the World Cup later this year as well. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, but let's get into it. So it strikes me when we're having these conversations at the moment about World Cup training squads that the World Cup seems months away, which it obviously is, but at the same time, it will be here before we know it. So it's worth having a look at these squads. Before we know it, I think it'll probably be the World Cup knockout stages and we'll be wondering where all that time has gone, particularly, I guess, once we get into those warm-up games. So it's time, I suppose, to start casting our eyes towards them. This is Ireland's squad. I'll put it up on screen now. As usual with these videos, I won't run through every single name because on the one hand, that's really boring for all of you and you would have probably seen the squad by now. But I'll go through in this video a few things that I think are interesting, a few kind of obvious talking points that struck me. But as I said in the intro, there will be other things I don't mention that I'm sure you will all have opinions on, so you can put them down in the comment section. But this is a 42-man training squad. It's going to be cut down to 33 players ahead of the start of the World Cup. So where do those cuts come from? Who misses out is always going to be fascinating. And of course, they've got the warm-up games before that to help those coaches and the selectors decide. The warm-up games for Ireland, just out of interest, 5th of August against Italy, 19th of August against England, and 26th of August against Samoa. The first two, Italy and England, are in Dublin, and then the last one is in France, as Ireland look to get acclimatised to French soil for a World Cup, which is, let's be honest, the biggest World Cup in Irish rugby history, I think. Going into it as the #1 ranked team, they are on a tough side of the draw, but for many people, they will be one of the favourites, if not the favourites, for the tournament. So the next few months for the Irish are going to be absolutely massive. But the squad has been up on screen there. I suppose, first of all, I think the thing that strikes me with Ireland squad selections is this Irish team, in many senses, is a beacon of stability, really, in that over the last 4 years, I know there was a little bit of a bumpy patch when Andy Farrell first came in, but for the most part, over the last 4 years, they have been an incredibly solid side, heading in one direction in terms of the trajectory of this team. They've been heading in an upward curve. We've seen that with the victory of the series in New Zealand. We've seen it with a Six Nations Grand Slam. We've seen it with all the teams that they've been able to beat at home. They've been incredibly impressive. And I think with that comes a level of security in your squad, which means when we look at this, and I will get onto some of the players that have missed out in a moment, but when you look at it generally, I think we know what Ireland's best team is. It's maybe just more some of those fringe players who could be looking for a bench position or a kind of squad position, rotational position, that is more interesting. To me, this is quite a settled, very strong, obviously, Irish squad. So in terms of the players that do miss out, Joey Carbery and Jordan Lama are two of probably the bigger names, I would suggest, that have missed out. Carbery's a fascinating one because, I mean, with a combination of injury and form, he's just never quite been able to live up to the tag of the heir apparent to Johnny Sexton, which he was labelled with many years ago when he first broke through. And those of you in Ireland or who watch a lot more of the Irish provinces will know better than me, but it does seem like injuries haven't been kind to him and his form has been affected as a result of that. So for me, it's not a huge shock that he's not there, but he's a kind of name which many people might point towards and just say it's interesting that he hasn't been selected. The one that I have seen mentioned a lot, and I must admit, social media is never the best barometer for judging these sorts of things, but Klein, the second row, seems to be a name that is cropping up an awful lot amongst the Ireland fans. I'll get onto the other second row options in just a moment, but it seems like a lot of people saying that he is the form second row in the URC or one of the form second rows and deserved his place in the squad. In terms of the players that are in, 4 uncapped players for Andy Farrell. You've got Calvin Nash, Jamie Osborne, Kieran Farrell and Tom Stewart. Calvin Nash in particular, I thought was excellent in the URC final. I know he's been very good for Munster all season, really, but I'm excited to see him go in there because if you look at those back three options, Keith Earls is in there, obviously massively experienced campaigner. Mac Hansen, Hugo Keenan, James Lowe, Nash, O'Brien and Jacob Stockdale as well. Lots of different options in there. So whether Nash is able to still be a part of the World Cup squad when it gets trimmed down, we'll wait and see. But I'm pleased that he's getting that opportunity ultimately. So I'll get on to a few different things. Klein in particular, Jack Crowley in there, perhaps that's the reason Carberry isn't, and also the front row as well. But I think the big thing I wanted to mention really, and the thing to bear in mind when it comes to the World Cup, and when you're looking at the squad and you have complaints about players that aren't there, and this goes for every nation, injuries will potentially have a massive, massive impact. In particular with the concussion protocols being what they are and the stand down periods now, it means if players get a concussion, they could end up missing potentially a couple of games, depending on how their fixtures fall. So I think at this World Cup, more than any other, injuries could have a big impact in terms of rotation and players coming in and out of squads than we've seen previously. That's going to be an interesting element to keep an eye on. But I mentioned Klein, as I say, second row, a name that seems to be cropping up an awful lot. In terms of the second rows that are there, you've got Byrne, Henderson, Ryan, Treadwell and McCarthy. And then Baird is there, who's kind of a hybrid, could play in the back row as well. And I think I'm correct in saying Coombs has played in the second row a bit as well, but it's probably mainly thought of as a back row option. And it kind of goes back to what I mentioned before in that there's just a lot of strength in that Ireland team. And I would say personally, someone looking from the outside, is you've got Tyke Byrne and James Ryan, who, if they're fully fit, those are going to be the starters. Maybe Ian Henderson or Henderson, the option on the bench. And then Treadwell, McCarthy, Baird. Like, there's so many options there, isn't there? That I suppose the question really for a lot of you is has Klein's form been so good that he should be in there over a number of those other guys? I think in particular, maybe Treadwell and McCarthy, there's a pretty good case for it. But my point is, it is an area of strength for Ireland overall. I wouldn't be too concerned about the second row. As I say, Jack Crowley over Carberry. I think I'm correct in saying as well, Crowley could potentially just have a bit more versatility as well in his game, and positionally and things like that could be a reason that he is there. But let me get on to the front row, because this is something that kind of struck me. And I look at the props, you've got Porter, Healy and Kilcoyne at the loose head, tight head, Furlong, Beelum and O'Toole, and then you've got 4 hookers named as well. Now, presuming, because of what I mentioned of the load on these squads at the World Cup, you're going to take 3 props per side of the scrum. So that's kind of locked in, is it, for Ireland? By the looks of things, it doesn't seem like they're going to be wavering. So I would imagine all of those guys that I've just mentioned in terms of the props will all go to the World Cup, because you're going to need all 3 of them. In terms of the hookers, Sheehan, Kelleher, Herring and Stewart, one of the guys I mentioned as uncapped, Tom Stewart, maybe one of them drops out, potentially maybe Stewart as the uncapped guy, or can he force his way into the World Cup training squad? But again, I just thought the front row seemed interesting to me because there's less room for manoeuvre. It looks to me like Andy Farrell knows his best options in that front row, and those will be the guys, and it's going to be other areas of the squad, which is where we're going to see players cut or not. Obviously, Johnny Sexton is there, hasn't played for a long time since the Six Nations. We don't know how much game time he will get, but for obvious reasons, he's been selected. So those are my kind of general thoughts on it, really. I guess what are the challenges, just to finish off the video, for Andy Farrell and this team? And it's going to be trimming this squad down, because we all know about the strength and depth that Ireland had. We know about the quality of Leinster, the obvious quality of Munster. I think that URC triumph is a brilliant thing for Irish rugby more generally, but also just for Ireland heading into the World Cup. But I think it makes the selection process that bit harder. So for me, that is the big challenge. The other thing, though, and I'm no doubt I will mention this again when I do a bigger preview of Ireland closer to the World Cup, is their draw, and we know how tough the side of the draw they're on is, but their draw works out quite well in that they play the supposed weaker sides, and I know no game's easy, but the supposed weaker sides in their first 2 games, and then they've got South Africa, and then they've got Scotland. I guess if you were being really picky, you'd put Scotland before South Africa, but overall, they've got the 2 strongest teams. Later in the group stage, they have a chance to get themselves warmed up for those 2 big matches, which will decide whether they get out the group or what position they will be to get out of that group. So I think that's a positive thing for Ireland. I think overall, this squad is packed full of quality. The question for Andy Farrell and those coaches is, what players do you leave out? Maybe you can let me know what you'll do down below in the comments section. I'm not a brave enough man to name my 33-man Ireland squad at this moment in time. Maybe after we've seen the warm-up games, I will stick my neck out on the line. So make sure you drop a comment. I look forward to reading them. I do read all of them. I know I often don't get round to responding to them, but I appreciate the support on the video. Likewise, if you can like it and support the channel, subscribe to it, that would be a massive, massive help. But as always, I will see you in the next one.